Hey guys, it's vf.miniatures Warhammer Tactics series, and if you're thinking of how to build your Leagues of Votann list, you're probably wondering how to fill your HQs out. And here I have my top 3 character builds for Leagues of Votann. So if you want to know how to build your characters mighty and powerful, let's dive right in without further ado. And as I think no Leagues of Votann list should exist without an AIRBRUSH champion in it, because it's just so good of a model that you definitely should have it in your list if you really want to build it as good as possible. Plus, almost all Leagues of Votann collectors now have them because they were a part of the Leagues of Votann army set, so we probably have this model on hand. So we want to kit the AIRBRUSH champion out as much as possible for maximum killing potential, because that's what they do and that's what they should be doing well. And also their survivability is already at a very, very high level for some reason for a 120 point character. They have 6 wounds, 4 up and vulnerable save, 2 up save with void armor, so it's basically a 1 up and no rerolls to wound and damage allowed against them, -1 damage and -1 to wound in combat. So just a crazy amount of buffs, defensive buffs stacked on this guy. And you can also turn on transhuman against shooting for him, as he has the shield crest. So just a whole lot of stuff defending this guy already. So we want to increase his killing potential, which is already at a pretty substantial level as is. And if you're playing any league but Kronos Hegemony, I recommend to take warlord warlord trait. It's a full reroll to wound in combat warlord trait, which is not probably that important in strength 2 hammer, but still very good to have against vehicles, monsters, anything that's toughness 6 or higher, and transhuman targets as well. And more importantly, it's a trait that allows you to ignore, as I like to say, ignore the ignores ability. So like Philoppanes, wound caps, anything like that. So Abaddon should be very scared of this guy, as should the Cetans, Kitans, as people like to call them, from Necron Codex, and a lot of other models that have this wound cap ability. So basically you cannot do more than X amount of wounds to them in a phase, which is a very strong defensive ability. But if you have this warlord trait, you don't care about that. And obviously, it's very strong in combination with the D3+3 damage mass hammer. And if you're playing Kronos, you might want to take exemplary hero instead of the warrior lord trait. They are almost identical in terms of their power. It just depends on who are you going to play against. If you're going to play against the Abaddon Necrons with Kitans and stuff like that, you definitely would like to have warrior lord instead of exemplary hero, just because of that ignoring wounds cap, which is very scary for anyone who has that very expensive model. But if you're playing against an army with a lot of monsters and characters that you want to charge, exemplary hero will be much more interesting, especially if they don't have the wound cap anyway. So exemplary hero is +1 attack and +1 to wound in melee against characters and monsters, which is obviously very good. Not that important against strength 10 hammer, but wounding on 2s, almost anything is very strong. And +1 attack is 6 attacks with Kronos. So again, a lot of attacks considering the fact that you have damage D3+3 in your hands. But the most important part is the full reroll to hit, which allows you to reroll those pesky ones, which are so annoying when your attacks are so few and so precious. As for the relic, you have 2 options in my humble opinion. First is the Exactor Mass Hammer, which is your crazy ass mass hammer relic, which is no -1 to hit, and again very good in combination with the reroll trait, for example, your hero, or at least you're only missing on 1s and not 1s and 2s, which would be a very, very bad time for you. So no -1 to hit, and your damage becomes mortal wounds on a 6 to wound, which is just insane. Obviously, it was much more dangerous when there was no FAQ that allowed you basically to translate all your hits, 6s to hit or 4s or 5 to hit, if the target has enough judgment tokens, into the 6s to wound, basically making the attacks like that, or attacks with the Magna Rail Rifle straight into the quote-unquote mortal wounds straight up. But now it's still a very potent relic, because you might still roll that 6 to wound, and suffering D3+3 mortal wounds is no joke for anything. in the game, especially characters with like 4 or 5 wounds. And that's very good if you wound up in combat with like a horde unit. So if you're fighting, say, just playing guardsmen and you need to kill a bunch of them, obviously a d3+3 damage hammer is no good against that. But if you roll that 1/6 wound, you might kill off 5 of them straight away and kill a couple more with some of your other attacks. Next option is a bit more defensive, but I still think it's very powerful. It's called Actal's Fortress. You can give that relic to anyone with a shield crest, and it's a fight last debuff within 3 inches. We already discussed this in detail in the video about the fight phase sequence, which I recommend to watch if you are looking to learn more about this game and how the advanced phases play out. So it's very important to have fight last debuffs in your army. If you have them, you have more control over the fight phase, and the fight phase is where the games are very, very often won. So if you can take this relic, I think you should. It's definitely a must-have. Maybe not on this character. You may want to give him the Exactor instead and have the Actal's Fortress on some other character you have. But you must have that relic. And this guy is very good for that because he will survive to actually bring that relic to the opponent, potentially use it multiple times, and that's when these relics become extremely efficient, is when you can use them turn after turn in the fight phase, decimating all the plans that opponent had on how they are supposed to be using their very potent melee units. Turning off potentially very, very dangerous threats and allowing you to strike first even when that unit charged is very strong. Next is the Khal. That's our standard support character, so the build is going to aim for most synergy possible. Firstly, I think he should always, well, preferably be the high Khal. You're paying 40 points for the joy of rerolling all hits on your Hearthkin, probably in the first turn, and later on for your Einherjar Hearthguard and their Volkites or their Plasma Blasters, whatever you've chosen for them. For Volkites is even more important because it allows you to reroll everything except for the 6s and fish for those mortal wounds, which is the most dangerous part of those Volkite guns. Because unlike the Imperium's Volkite, which does a mortal wound on a 6 wound, the Votann, as the tradition goes, everything with Votann is just slightly better than the Imperium equivalent, does the mortal wound on a 6 hit, which allows you to do this trick with rerolls. Plus, when he destroys a unit for his high Khal buff, he can give some other enemy unit in opponent's army a judgment token. His wargear is probably going to be the Rampart crest for the 5-up and 1 on your infantry. Very important for your Hearthkin warriors if you're not playing the Ymir Conglomerate, which obviously already has the 5-up and vulnerable save. And the second wargear option would be, in my case, Mass Gauntlet, but if you don't have those spare 10 points, it's not a problem. Again, this is not a combat character, so you can easily give him the axe instead. He's not for combat unless you really want to kit him out like that, and you're probably then playing Cronus Hegemony, and then you can give him the Exemplary Hero Warlord trait and so on and so forth. His Warlord trait should be Experienced Eye, which you've unlocked by making him a high Khal. Experienced Eye allows him to give 1 judgment token to 2 visible enemy units instead of 1. You cannot give the judgment token, 2 judgment tokens to 1 unit. Those can only be different units, but that's still very strong because your judgment token mechanic is one of the most powerful ones in the codex. Ancestral Bearing is also a great warlord trait. It's +3 to your ores and +3 to command phase buffs. So your reroll buff from the high Khal ability, you can give that to someone within 9, and again your reroll ones to hit will be available to everyone within 9 again. For the relic, I would probably save the command point because there isn't much to take for extra synergy if the Actal Fortress is already on the Einherjar champion. If not, the Actal Fortress should be on high Khal because, again, that relic is an auto take in my opinion. Or you can take a weapon relic like Flare, which is a cool +2 strength +3 attacks axe, which is crazy. So it's 7 attacks on your regular Khal with strength 6 AP 3, damage 2, or the Hearth Fist, which is a mass gauntlet with no penalties to hit and damage 4 against one or more judgment token bearing targets. Very, very strong. Probably not worth the command point, as you only have 4 attacks on the Cull, and unless you're playing against, again, Hegemony and trying to build the most powerful characters, and you should want them all to be very, very good in combat, I would probably spend the command point elsewhere. Now we're going to talk about the beautiful Grimnir character. So that's our psychic support character. We want to milk out as much psychic prowess from him as possible, and for that obviously he should be a Lord Grimnir, which allows him to cast 3 powers, which is incredible, and somehow it's the same amount of casts that Magnus the Red has, who is the Demon Primarch, the best psychically gifted being in the whole known universe. But we'll leave that to people who write the rules for Games Workshop, why Magnus has so little casts. But we were going to be happy for the Grimnir, which obviously we want to be happy because that's the model we're going to be using in our army. So we want him to cast Warp Charge 5 Interface Echo Psychic Power every turn. That's our +1 command point power, which is very important considering the fact that Leagues of Votann stratagems are one of the best I've ever seen, and you want to have as many command points as possible to use them. He only knows 2 powers base, as almost all psychic characters do, so we want to expand that as much as possible, and for that a Murmuring Stave relic is going to help us. It allows us to know an extra power and do 1 psychic action and 1 psychic power together in a phase. And here I'll stop for a second to say that this combo that I'm describing to you now, Lord Grimnir combo, let's just call it, is one of the 2, and the second one is basically you can save up those, I think it's 25 points on making him a Lord Grimnir, which is, you might say, why would you want to do that? So basically, if you don't care really about the 45 power, which is the second best we have here, it's +1 toughness and 6 up, feel no pain. If you don't really care about that and only want to use Grimnir as, for example, like your deny unit and your CP farm, which is something I can think of as a good idea, you can give him the interface echo power and the Murmuring Stave, so he knows 3 powers, and use him to cast your psychic interrogation secondary powers, which would allow you to gain 1 more command point, because interface echo is very interesting. It allows you to gain a command point, but it does not count towards the limit that you have in a battle round, which is very strong, because if you manage to get the psychic power from the psychic interrogation, you can basically mine 2 command points with 1 character, which is very, very strong, obviously. But that's one build you can have. The more regular buffing build is the one that we are talking here, and I'm continuing talking about that now. His other 2 powers would probably be Warp Charge 6 Fortify, which I've already mentioned, +1 toughness and 6 up feel no pain on a unit which we select. In my case would probably always be Hearthguard, because we really want to have a feel no pain on something that is basically a 3 wound model. They are 2 wounds with -1 damage. So if something like damage 3 comes along, we want to have a chance to roll at least 1 shrug for that. In this case, it's actually worse than having a 6 up shrug on our Terminators, because we are only getting 1 out of 2 chances to roll a 6 instead of 1 out of 3. Which is better, obviously, but that's what we have to deal with. And +1 toughness is obviously very good. They already have toughness 5, so it's not that powerful, but toughness 6 sometimes can be very helpful. And the third power would either be a Null Vortex or the Crushing Contempt, or you can switch Fortify for one of these 2 if you don't think you need that. Null Vortex is turn off someone's invulnerable save within 12, very strong. I would probably choose that, or Crushing Contempt, which is -1 to hit and turn off action. If you roll over leadership, you do -1 to hit, and if you roll equal to or over the leadership, you can turn off the action that someone is doing and prevent them from doing more actions until the next psychic phase. Very strong, you might want to select that instead of fortify. That's up to you, but these are the powers that I would choose. As for the warlord traits, I think we have two good options here. First is Lord Grimnir specific, so we unlock it by making him Lord Grimnir, and its ancestral power, it's +6 to range of your psychic powers. Very strong on the null vortex, because if you can turn off someone's invulnerable save if they are 18 inches away, it's very strong. And being able to like do crushing contempt from, I think it's 24 inches away, very good. Not important for the interface echo, obviously, so it's up to you if you want to use that. Or the second one, which is probably, I would say, even more powerful, is OBSEC or double OBSEC on the core unit. So if a unit already has OBSEC, you can give it double OBSEC, and if they don't like Hearth Guard, and here Hearth Guard, you can give them OBSEC, which is very powerful. Obviously, we want to have as much potential to hold objectives as possible, so I'll probably go for that. So that's it, guys. I hope this video was useful. Let me know if you think there are better builds for the characters in Leagues of Votann Codex. I would love to hear your opinion in the comments section below, and I'll see you next time.